before we get any further into the book of Isaiah, we need to have, I think, a better understanding of what God is trying to do through the office of the prophet. The prophet is one of three offices, for lack of a better term, in Israel. It's one of the three ways that a person of the God of the Israelites leads God's people. And so I'm going to need some participation. And I need someone to come up here and to be a model for the priest. So I'm going to specifically look to see if there's any nominations for a minister of Northside to come be the priest. Does anybody have any good ideas? So Rachel Starr, come on up. Come on up. I have some goodies, okay? Oh, I want to show that. I'm just going to cover that up. Hey, Rachel, thanks for doing this. Rachel's going to put that on because that's the priestly garb. There you go. Good. And priests are wise. And so, Rachel, I need you to show that you've got a lot of years of wisdom and put that. I think that's how, yeah, good job. And if you remember, the first priest was Aaron, and Aaron and Moses led with a staff. So I just need to hold that staff just like that. That's great. It might go a little bit, yeah, the mustache, there you go. Okay. And Rachel, I'm going to need your help. Rachel, who do you think would be a good king? I think we should choose from the elders. Who's a good king? So who's an elder that you would nominate?
Rod Cyrus?
Rod Cyrus. Could you come up here, Rod? Oh, thanks, Rod. This is good. Rod, we've got some clothes for you. So I need you to have that hat, but then that goes with that. So there you go. And yeah, both. I think you did it perfect. You got it. It looks like he's done it before. Yeah, very good. Okay, Rod, we're going to need now the office of the prophet. So I think the prophet needs to be a young person. Could you think of the name of a young person that could come help us?
Is Kate here?
Kate who?
Hodges.
Kate Hodges? Is Kate Hodges here? Come on up, Kate Hodges. Perfect. Thanks, Rod. Okay. Kate, you're too young to know David Letterman, but the old folks will know that makes sense right there, okay? So just put that on your head. And I don't have an envelope, but if you could kind of like hold. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Okay, this is the prophet, the priest, and the king. And these are the three offices we tend to think of when we think of, let me get out of the way so Rachel Crane can take a picture. When we tend to think of the offices of Israel, okay? At first, there is just the priest. The priest is like I said, is the first priest is Aaron, and Aaron becomes the father of all the priestly class. The people of the priestly class don't necessarily own land. They're not given their own land, but they live amongst the other tribes, and they live at the temple. And their job is to keep Israel sacred to the story. Keep Israel, the presence of God sacred among the Israelites. And so when God gives Moses the 10 commandments or the 10 words or the law itself, the covenant of love, those words are kept by the priests in the Holy of Holies. In fact, I've got one more thing for Rachel because this is important. We need you to keep a good grasp on our story. That's our story. And we need the story around us. We need to remember what God has done for us. As we come out of Egypt and as the people of God travel with God and they all go all the way to the land that God has been promising them, a land flowing with milk and honey, they establish themselves and they build a temple to God. And God lives there in their presence, their special God that has a special relationship with them. And so far, the only leader that God has asked Israel to honor is the priest. The priest is the only leader that God asks for. Well, then there's a priest named Eli. Okay, so now you're Eli. And the priest named Eli, the people start getting a little bit restless. And they come to Eli and they say, "We want a king like the other nations. We want to be like the other nations." This is a common problem for Israel, their desire to be something other than what they are. We want a king to rule us. One of the early leaders of the movement that becomes Churches of Christ, a man named David Lipscomb, once wrote, "This is Israel's moment of downfall." He said, when Israel desired a king, it was regarded by God as a rejection of him as king. God, in his long-suffering, permitted them to have a king, but it was a rebellion against his government. The desire for a human king indicated a desire to be like other nations, to adopt their customs and to reject the government of God. And so God says to Eli, "Oh, that's okay. I'm going to give them what they want because they haven't rejected you, Eli. They've rejected me as God." And so God gives them a king. And Saul, it's perfect actually, Saul becomes our first king. And the reason that they chose him as a king is because he was tall and handsome. We did not rehearse this. I know that's a shocker, okay? Which may not be, in hindsight, a good reason to choose somebody as king. Saul was not a good king. And after a while, he is replaced by King David, who is the king of all kings. He's like the goat of kings. They say that he is the king after God's own heart. But David, if we really examine his story, isn't that great of a guy. He's not that great of a guy. One day he sees a woman, Bathsheba, bathing on a roof. And he says, "Go get her and bring her to me." And the reason this is possible is because her husband is away at battle, a battle that David didn't want to be a part of. And he sleeps with her and she becomes pregnant. And then to cover it up, through a series of horrible double-crossing beneath the king behaviors, David has her husband killed and brings Bathsheba into his house. Well, there is a court attendant at the time, a man named Nathan. Nathan goes to David and starts telling David a story. He said there was once a very rich man. He had all of the sheep you could want, because back in those days, having a lot of sheep made you really rich. And then there was a man who only had one little lamb, and he loved this lamb, and that lamb was all he had. And then one day the rich man saw the little lamb and said, "I have to have it." And he went and he took the lamb away from the poor man, and the poor man had nothing. And David said, "I will avenge this man's death," because David did not understand allegory, and he thought it was real. And Nathan says to him, "You are that man." And the office of the prophet is born. You're Nathan. Good job. Hold on. One more. Oh, where did I put it? Oh, yeah. I was right there. One more thing out of my picnic basket. I need you to put that on. Okay. Yep, there you go. Kate's never boxed before. The office of the prophet is to hold the king and the priestly class accountable. So kind of like shake your fist at him. Yeah. The office of the prophet is here for the dual purpose of holding the powers of religion and politics accountable to their calling. And what I want us to see today with our three very awesome, somewhat reluctant participants is that the role of the king and the role of the prophet were never what God asked for. And as we go through Isaiah, and as we read about this office that emerges out of necessity, I need us to know that the role of the prophet is here. Yes, thank you. Because the king, and before that, the priest, have failed completely. Okay, let's give them a big round of applause. You can sit down. Here, you can keep them or give them whatever you want. You're keeping that, that's fine. Rod doesn't want to keep that. Okay. You're welcome. Yeah, that's great. Keep it. Thanks so much. So as we come to our story today, we are in the context of the prophet Isaiah rising up out of, we don't quite know where. We know that his father is Amoz. We know roughly what's happening geopolitically at the time. We know that the ancient empire of Babylon is amassing power. They are to the east of Israel in what is modern-day northern Iraq. And they are growing in power and force. And as they grow, their need for land and supplies and resources and people is growing. Israel sees this and gets nervous. And it might be that Israel begins looking around to other powers in the area. Syria to the north, Egypt to the south and the west. And perhaps they are building alliances. It would be in Egypt's interest for Babylon not to be able to get closer to them, not to take over the land of Israel and get closer to Egypt. And so maybe Egypt has an interest in propping up Israel. Well, Israel's leaders, the kingly class, the priestly class, they are maybe getting quite wealthy because of these alliances. They are becoming addicted to the power of what other countries, what other alliances, other covenants can bring them. They amass wealth and they amass power, and in doing that, they become dependent on this. As they get more money, they become more estranged from their fellow Israelites. Maybe their fellow Israelites aren't doing so well. Maybe there's an increase in people who can no longer provide for themselves. I think one of the things we have to continually remind ourselves of the ancient world is that there is no safety net for people. When usually the male of the house, the father of the house, the paterfamilia passes away, when something happens and there is a woman or a child who no longer has a male who can own land or can have a job, he can no longer provide for them, they are left without anything. And so as the politically rich, as the religious rich grow in wealth, there grows something that was never intended to be in God's covenant with Israel. A bottom class, a group of people who cannot provide for themselves and so go hungry and starve and suffer. In God's economy, in God's covenant with Israel, this is the same as doing direct violence to those people. To allow a fellow Israelite to suffer is the same as to go and to beat them, to attack them. Israel's leaders, their political and religious leaders, are coming to worship. And there's this awkward moment. Isaiah begins with an incredibly awkward moment. Israel's leaders come to worship, and God says to them, "What to me is the multitude of your sacrifices? I have had enough of the offerings of rams and the fat of fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or of goats." I want to stop here for a second because we could mistake the punchline that's coming. We could mistake what's happening here. Some have said that ancient worship in Israel is a lot like going to a butcher shop. People would bring their animals, their first fruits, the best of the best animals, and they would give them to the priests, and the priests were skilled butchers. They would cut up the ram, they would cut up the bird, they would cut up whatever offering was being offered, and they would give the right amount to offering, keep the right amount for themselves, and give the right amount back to the people offering it. And so, it sounds weird to us, but in Israel's worship, there is a constant flow of blood, a constant buildup of animal product. And God is now saying, that does not delight me anymore. I am not delighted by the blood of bulls or of lamb of goats. When you come to appear before me, who asked this from your hand? And they might say, well, you, God, you. We can go back to our scriptures and give you book, chapter, and verse for where you asked for this. But God says, bringing your offerings has become futile. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath and calling of convocation. I cannot endure solemn assemblies with your iniquity. Your new moons and your appointed festival, my soul hates. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. Here's the punchline. When you stretch out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, your hands I will not listen, for they are full of blood. And the point is not that they are full of the blood of rams and goats and bulls, but full of the blood of their own people. The religious elite, the political elite of Israel have stepped over the bodies of their own people to get to worship today. And God says, this fragrance, this smell that's rising up, these burnt offerings, your incense, your prayers, they make me sick. I want to vomit. Israel has forgotten their God. They have fallen into the trap of thinking that doing the things that God asks for, going through the motions of worship, going through the motions of right worship, is the only thing God cares about. And in the process, they have forgotten the very thing that made them who they are, God's special people. They have forgotten the covenant that God made with them. Go all the way back to Genesis chapter 12. All the way back to a wandering nomad named Abram at the time. God says to this man, I will make you into a great nation, Genesis 12. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. In Abram, God gives all of his descendants a job. And it's actually the only job that God ever asked of Israel. The job of priest. Not of king. Not to be kingly with other kings. And there certainly, therefore, should not need to be the role of prophet to hold the priest and the king accountable. But Israel is supposed to be a blessing for the whole world. They are supposed to be good news for all those who do not know this God. And Israel has failed to be good news even to itself. The blood of their own people is on their hands as they come to worship today. And God says, I don't want it. God's job in this covenant relationship is to protect Israel. It's to keep them from harm, even though they're really not much of a nation to speak of. There's really no reason for them to keep surviving. God will keep them safe. All they have to do is carry on this role of priest, this role of good news, that their very presence should matter in the world because they show the world what it's like to be in relationship with God. And so they have turned to kings. at first their own kings, and then they turn to the kings of other nations and they say, well, won't you please help us? Won't you come please protect us? Which is to say, we no longer have faith in the God of our covenant to protect us. We need you, Egypt, to come protect us. We need you, Assyria, to come protect us. Won't you come please help us? We're so weak. And then they lose their sole vocation, their sole job of being good news, at first even to their own people. They have completely left and forgotten the covenant of God and decided that following God was all about doing this worship ritual. And that at the base of that worship ritual was not, in fact, a deep and abiding, individual, special relationship with the God of all creation. And so they've forgotten God. A theologian named Walter Brueggemann says this best, if we can put that quote up there. The central indictment in the prophetic tradition, especially in Isaiah, is that Israel has forgotten Yahweh. Forgetting Yahweh means that Israel has grown self-sufficient, imagining that it can secure its own future without preference to Yahweh's will or purpose. This forgetfulness is not a mere lapse of memory. It is a deliberate disregard for the covenant and a turning toward other gods and political alliances for security. It is not that Israel was like, oops, I forgot one day. It is, in another prophet, Hosea, almost like an affair. It is the willful running away from. It is the willful, intentional turning away from the God who's chosen them and plucked them out for God's purpose to be special. And they have run again and again and again to the arms of other lovers. And so Isaiah comes at this special time. Isaiah comes in the role of prophet, which should not have been a necessary office. Isaiah comes and he says over and over and over again a word that I need us to remember. A command, an action, something that I think will be quite necessary for a church, for the people of God to continue to remember. And this word is the Hebrew word shuv. Shuv. It means to return, turn back, restore, compense, recover, give. It's a very common verb in Hebrew. When the tides recede, the tides of the ocean shuv. But in this case, in our case, it is this physical action, this very physical thing of running away from the God of our youth, the God who has chosen us, and to turn back, to turn and go back. Isaiah says, shuv, Israel, shuv. Though your hands are full of blood, verse 16, wash yourselves. Make yourselves clean. Remove your evil deeds from before my eyes. Stop doing evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Rescue the oppressed. Defend the orphan. Plead for the widow. Isaiah said, your princes have become rebels and companions of thieves. Everyone loves a bribe and runs after gifts. They do not defend the orphan and the widow's cause. They do not come before them. So turn and go back. Turn and go back to the God who chose you. And how do you do that? By turning towards the people God loves. It isn't by rehabilitating our worship ritual. It's not by abstaining from certain things. It's not from making sure that people see you do other spiritual things. It is a quiet but committed turning towards the people who God says, love them, see them, For when you see them, you see me. I am a God who has chosen you to be a blessing. And so when there is someone among you who is cursed, here comes the prophet. Here comes the poetic prophet who will say, oh, you're walking over those people on your way to worship today. You've forgotten them. Well, when you have forgotten them, you have forgotten me. You cannot worship God while breaking God's covenant. You cannot honor God while breaking God's heart. You can't love God while ignoring the people God loves. When we forget to be a blessing, when we forget to be a people of blessing, we forget God. Do you remember what Jesus said about this? You remember what Jesus said about seeing God in surprising places? And the way to be sure to never forget to do something loving for our King, Jesus says in Matthew 25, the King will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you as a stranger, invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The King will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. The people of God just can't forget about God. We cannot be people that just go through the religious motions. Our job in this world is to be a blessing for everyone. Lord, let this church be the people that bless you by blessing the stranger among us. Church, would you stand and receive this blessing? May the peace of our Lord Jesus Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you in the wilderness. May he protect you in the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at all the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again to these doors.